Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you here to the Art Gallery of Peterborough. We have such a wonderful crowd here today. I'm just quite excited to see such a large gathering on such, when it's good weather, you never know how it's going to turn out. I think if there are a few more that join us, I think we're just getting out some extra chairs here in the back, but it's a really wonderful gathering once again. Thank you for attending. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Michi-Sagig people in which we're gathered. It's a really honor to have the Art Gallery of Peterborough now over 40 years situated on this particular point of land. And it always sets a wonderful tone for what we do within this institution. I just couldn't help but take the opportunity on this day. So if you bear with me, I've just returned from a gathering out on the West Coast, and it just seemed the last day of this particular very important exhibition, that it was a good time to reflect on where we are as an institution and to set a context of this exhibition within the broader field of what's going on in visual art across Canada. I'm part of CAMDO, which is an organization of directors of public galleries, and we meet twice a year. It's always in a different location across Canada, so you have exposure to other institutions. It's always hosted by a gallery in those cities, and we bring together discussions that are really pertinent to the field, issues that challenge us. We also invite folks in from the Canada Council, for instance, to give us a head up on what's coming down from their perspective in regards to funding or the context for the granting systems. And it's a way to take pulse of what's shifting within the cultural sector. So the discussions are always really intriguing and timely, and I always welcome the opportunity to go. This particular occasion, we were very lucky that we were invited by the Audain Art Museum, which just opened 8 months ago in Whistler, which is on Squamish and Little Wat territory. So what a wonderful opportunity to spend 3 days in that beautiful environment in the West Coast. Michael Audain is a businessman. He's a developer well known in Vancouver, quite wealthy. Him and his wife have collected art all their lives and have amassed an amazing collection. And that's what his motivation was for establishing this art museum, a place to hold his collection. As he ages, he was trying to find a way to keep that collection open and alive, because their collection particularly focused on West Coast art. So he wanted to make sure that was remained available within Canada. So the conference began with a panel discussion entitled Directions in Indigenous Contemporary Art. We had the opportunity ahead of time to provide questions, and the panel was moderated by Dr. McGill Isis Dangeli, who's a dancer and instructor at University of British Columbia. And it included artists Raymond Bajoli, Marianne Nicholson, Dana Claxon, and Tanya Willard, all Indigenous artists who are really practicing on the West Coast of Canada, although they're well known right across our country. The conversation was extremely frank and open. The panel sitting on the stage was all Indigenous. The audience, all white Anglo-Saxon. That's the nature of our field. It's evolving, but really the gauntlet was thrown down by that panel. We've made a lot of change. How do we make more? When do we see our faces in within the realm of arts administration? How do we see Indigenous curators within your staff, on your boards? All of these things are issues that we need to take on and figure out as institutions. There wasn't even a person of color, let alone Indigenous, in that audience. It's remarkable. I mean, we all have mixed backgrounds, of course, coming to this country as we have, but we're at a pivotal point in which, further change has to happen. Certainly, Dana Claxton challenged us by saying, this is, this conversation has gone on 40, 50 years, asking us to consult, to offer advice, but just how can it unfold? Marianne Nicholson, as an artist, has had some really interesting ideas that I'd like to think about more, perhaps in discussion with her. The very structure of our institutions is challenged. How do we evolve that in order to affect change? We're all based on Western model. And this is certainly something that seems to be really pivotal, considering we are doing this talk on Victoria Day weekend. So how do we take up this conversation and move on to another stage? Although under the heading of contemporary art, this discussion was very much about collecting and the display of Indigenous culture. And this soon became very clear when we, later that evening when we walked into the museum and saw that the Audain collection included an amazing collection of West Coast masks, which were displayed in a very traditional museum manner, beautifully displayed, but it was in the manner of Western culture and identified as such. This was very contentious with our panel, and certainly was something that was open for discussion. Each of them were also included in the collection of Michael Audain. But you could see that within this institution, it certainly was set up that there's going to be ongoing discussion. Whether the board of the Audain are open to that or not is another matter, because I think they were quite surprised at some of the discussion that unfolded. This experience was very challenging, and yet it set the tone for many discussions. We went on to meet for another 2 days. We had presentations from the Canada Council and from CPER, but Canadian Cultural Properties. But every discussion came back to the issues that were brought up by this panel. It was constantly referred to and really set a tone. So here we are, as I said, May 24th weekend, a long-standing tradition in Canadian culture, happens to be Queen Victoria's birthday. It's sort of a symbol of colonization, but we see it in many ways. I don't know if our young people know the history of this particular day, but it certainly seems to me that I'm happy that we ended up with this final conversation within the exhibition to be on this particular weekend. I think it sort of marks a nice opportunity to consider. We are really blessed in the Curators to have a real, extremely rich cultural community and a healthy working relationship with the First Nations people in this region. We've done many projects with William Kingfisher in particular. We've been connected into the Odamanguizas Festival. We have a long-standing history of doing that. This exhibition didn't come to fruition simply because it ticked off the boxes on our grant. It happened because we really are committed to the discussion, because Arthur Shilling is an incredibly important artist, and it was timely, and the opportunity was to be seized to develop this exhibition. And we were so delighted that we were able to work with William Kingfisher. We've been able to get funding from the Ontario Arts Council, from the Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, and brought all of this together, along with the commitment from the many collectors and institutions that have lent their works for this exhibition to create this. There are so many opportunities for us now. Here at the Art Gallery of Peterborough, we're just coming to completion of our strategic plan. The Canada Council has just released a new funding model, which I was delighted to hear more about, because in fact, it helps us to think differently about what we do and how we do it. And instead of thinking about what those check marks are in the grant, you actually can know within your institution who you are and what you want to do. Do you see yourself as catalyst? Do you see yourself as a research and presenter? These are all the different categories. They've really shaped the way the grants look in a very different way, which gives us actually a lot more freedom. Scary as it is, freedom, it does allow you the incredible power to shape what your future is. Also, the Ontario Arts Council has revised many of their granting systems, so I think we're going to see quite a difference. And it also can't, part of our discussion was also reflecting on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that it actually is a call to action, and that the things that have been coming out of that commission are something very solid that we should be responding to. So while at we were at the Squamish and Lillooet Cultural Center, I happened to see an exhibition that's actually been touring for over a decade, and developed by Jeff Thomas, Where Are the Children? I was surprised to see that I hadn't, although aware of it, I hadn't seen that exhibition before, and I just wanted to mention that Shirley Williams is part of that exhibition. It's bringing focus to the fact that there was so much loss in residential schools. In fact, the survival rate for children within the residential school was slightly higher than a soldier in the Second World War. So incredibly difficult wound within our country that needs to be responded to. And I just want to say that I'm so honored that Shirley Williams has worked with us on the translation of our didactics and is continuing to work with us on with our publication, the translations of the essays. I don't know if I acknowledged that Jeff Thomas, artist Jeff Thomas, was the curator of that exhibit. So, you know, these things, everything that we do, I mean, sometimes we think we're small town Ontario here in Peterborough, but in fact, everything we do in every community makes a huge difference. Things are changing. They already have changed. They're continuing to change. And the fact that we have such an enormous crowd here today on such beautiful weather gives me confidence that they will continue to evolve. And so I want to thank you once again for attending this important moment, and want to just say again to William Kingfisher that we've worked with him with many different projects, and it's been quite an honor to develop this particular exhibition. And there's more ahead. And thank you, William. He has incredible patience, always open to discussion. So, you know, we've developed quite a rich and dynamic working relationship with William over the years. And I also want to thank Fynn Leitch, our curator, who this project was already underway in development when she came in as curator, and so she has taken up this mission of creating this. As you know, this exhibition is going on to tour. It will be opening in Thunder Bay in June, and it will be at the McLaren Arts Centre in Barrie next year, and there will be more to be announced. So thank you for your time on that, and I want to pass the microphone over to Fynn.
Thank you, Celeste. I hope we can live up to that call to action. And yeah, it's true. When I came on in 2014, we were really in, relatively the final stages of development, because this project has been, in one form or another, in William's brain for 10 years at least, I think. In some form or another. And so, you know, while I began here 2 years ago in the summer of 2014, there had already been 2 grants. We were already 2 grants into this development of the project, which really was in your head before then, before it solidified into that. And I think that incredible stretch of time has been in part kind of like a conversation between you and Arthur, and I think about your writing in the forthcoming in your essay in the forthcoming catalog, which really beautifully, I think, sets up a conversation between the two of you that I see starting with you and your uncle in his studio, and continuing well beyond his living years. And I think it's really ramped up in this last few months. So yeah, I'm really happy to sort of have that conversation pulled apart here. And really, we're going to be talking about the process. We're not going to do analyses of paintings, though, we may touch on some of that. But what we're really trying to do is talk about that tremendous amount of development and process that went into what you see before you. And we're gonna take questions at the end. So if you have a question, try to either keep it in your mind or write it down, and there'll be time then. But we're just gonna try and hold it until later. And I wanted to begin by asking you, William, about that tension that must have been there, because I imagine it's difficult to come to terms with or to finally agree to curate somebody who you're so close to. Because it must be kind of difficult to take that insider-outsider perspective and feel comfortable and professional curating somebody who you grew up with. So I'm just hoping that you can talk a little bit about that, if that's...
Thank you, Fynn. Okay. First of all, it's really nice to see everybody here this afternoon. It's not too often we get to talk about the curatorial process and have people that want to listen to this. Well. And I like how you're calling this a conversation, my conversation with Arthur. I think that's really interesting because for me, curating is a conversation. It's a conversation between myself as a curator and the artist. It's a conversation where I'm inserting myself between the artist and his work, or their work, and between the work and the context in which it arose. Artworks sit on walls, in this particular show, but they're more than just objects that sit on walls. There's a particular context within which they arise, which they were created. Context, there's a social context, a political context, cultural context, and in these particular works, I would say the spiritual context. So you talked about the tension. Yeah, okay. Well, it started out, this one was a little bit different for me. I've often worked with artists that are alive, and we have conversations. We talk about the work. I see what they're trying to do. I see how they're trying to insert themselves within the world today with their work. In this particular case, Arthur was not alive. He had passed on 30 years ago. But, so a different kind of a conversation begins. Talking with the family about a lot of, about how he worked, some stories, just sitting around talking with the family, and they tell you stories about how he would get up in the morning before everybody's up and he would have 3 paintings done. He would have that incredible drive. He was not well a lot of the times. He had a really bad heart problem. But, there's things like that, or you would just get these stories about him. So also reading his words, he gave a lot of interviews. He wrote this incredible book, The Ojibwe Dream, had a lot of his thoughts and words in there. And the research I did, I spent a good year just doing research on his work, how it fitted, talking with other artists and stuff, and then really looking closely at his work. But I think the tension you're talking about is the insider-outsider. I am, my mother was Arthur's oldest sister, so Arthur was my uncle. So here I was an insider, so I was able to access these stories, sit with the family. But at the same time, I was an outsider as well. I work I don't live in the community any longer. I left there about 5 years ago. And so I'm a bit of an outsider. So, and I work in a professional place, and I have a different kind of a world. So coming into the Shilling, a meeting with the family, I was coming there as a professional, but at the same time, I was also a member of the family. So So they wanted me there, but at the same time, I had to show them that it was really important for me to show that we're professional. This isn't just a show that we're going to kind of tack up somewhere, but this is we wanted to position Arthur, his work, and talk about how, what an incredible artist he was, and and the contributions he made to that discussion of contemporary Aboriginal art in Canada. Because he was, as we found out in the, locating works and talking to different people, most of his work was collected through collectors and not institutions. So collectors saw the value of his work, but institutions didn't quite, it seems to me. There's a few works here that are from collections, but they only had a few. It was mostly the collectors, so he wasn't part of that. I don't think he fit within that accepted discourse of Aboriginal art at that time he was working. So.
Well, it was so dominated. Right?
Yeah, by the Woodland School, and Arthur worked outside of that. He wanted to create his own space, and he often said that. He said, "I want my own space. I want to," and he had other issues he was trying to deal with. And he was trying to tell us that through his paintings. Anyways.
I think often about, you would sort of go out into the world and do research and meetings, and then you'd come back with these great stories, and you're a really great storyteller. So it was always fun when William was coming back from some research. And I think about sort of those early meetings with the family. And I think about those early times when, now that you've committed, maybe, to really seriously investigating whether or not you're going to do this show, or whether you're going to be able to do this show, going into the studio and sitting around that table, kitchen table, and talking about it. And you shared a really, I think, sort of beautiful story about that sort of moment when the family said, "Yeah, we've been waiting for this." Yeah, I think the audience would love to hear.
I think you touched on a little, maybe my hesitation. I didn't come into this. I was always attracted to Arthur's work. I always loved it. It was always something huge for me, especially as a kid looking at his work and just seeing the colors. And I used to think that these paintings were alive, and I used to look really closely and see, how did he do this, So it was trying to capture, I think with the tension also was, trying to capture what I felt needed to be done for his work. I was a bit hesitant to take on this project because I didn't know whether I could do the work as well as I think he would have wanted it. So I was like, if I take it on, it's a commitment, and it's a really important one. It's representing, this work, but it's also a personal thing with the family, and also trying to represent Arthur Shilling, who, for me, it was always this really giant figure, in the family. So I think you captured that a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. So it was conversations with Celeste at the very beginning, where it must have been where he came up in conversation, and she said, would you ever want to do a show? And I was like, yes, I would, but, And she said, well, just do this research and see what you would do, So it's kind of like that. So that's how I, okay, we did the research. Now can we maybe do a grant? It was kind of like that. Okay, we'll do the grant. It was really interesting. The research was great. I loved it. So I was like, okay, there's something here. Maybe I've got a way to get in, into his work rather than being this huge thing. Okay, so first time meeting with the family. This was a really crucial meeting. We had gathered some works, but I really wanted it to be special. I wanted some of the works from this book here, in the show. And I had gone through this book so many times. I knew exactly which ones I wanted. But I didn't know how many the family had, okay? They're pretty private. When I speak of the family, I'm talking about Millie, Biwabin, and Travis. Millie's his wife. Biwabin and Travis are his sons. Okay, so I had already done research, And I had had conversations with the other members of the family, my Uncle Paul and my Aunt Glenna Matouche. And so, so I kind of knew that there were some paintings left in the studio. Remember, this is 30 years later. And so there's some paintings left in the studio, I was told. And so I had, I made a couple appointments with the family, and they didn't show. There's some things happen, and okay, a couple months go by, and I'm getting worried. You know, we've got due dates. You know, and we've got a lot of works, but these are the key pieces. You know, I love them. You know, and so finally we met over at B. Wobbin's place in Aurelia. I come into the kitchen. And then we go into the dining room, we sit down at the table, and I'm wanting to be, you know, professional, so I'm dressed up, you know, as a professional, you know, and I've got all these catalogs from the work that we've been doing here at the gallery, which I'm really proud of. I love the catalogs, and I think they're so professional, so I'm showing them, and they're really impressed. And so we're chatting for a little while, and I said, so, about those paintings, you know, I says, I hear you've got, you know, some, you know, left in the studio, you know. And I do know that from my other research that other collectors were trying to get these works because they saw the value of them and they wanted to take them overseas where they can get a lot of money for them. So I was kind of worried about that too. That was kind of in my mind. And I was worried about the pieces, you know, how many do they have and will they let me borrow them? I don't know these things, you know. So we're sitting there and I says, you know, they go, well, which pieces do you want? I says, well, you know, if you have any left over from the Ojibwe Dream book, I would love to borrow a couple of those. And they said, well, Millie looks at me and says, well, we have them all. And I said, you have them all? And she goes, yeah, we have them. We've been, she says, and I said, that's amazing, that's incredible, it's like a miracle. And I says, I do know that collectors have been after them. She goes, yeah, they've been bugging us for years. They want to buy them all. And she says, they've been bugging us for years. She says, and I says, well, why didn't you sell them? You know, they're not wealthy, you know, people, you know. She says, well, we couldn't possibly sell them. She said, they are Arthur's life. They are Arthur's philosophy. And they were his gift to Canada. So she said, there wasn't even something they considered. So anyways, they said they had them all, and then a week from today, they said, when I'm sitting here chatting with them, they said, a week from today, you come to the studio and we'll have them all up for you. And so I was able to go there and choose which ones I wanted, and yeah, it was an amazing day. And it just, from that day forward, I think the show really came together. It was like I had a relief, you know, I knew that this was going to be what I had thought it would be. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get the sense that they were waiting for the right thing to come along and shared, and probably I think also gained trust with you because you came to the project with a little bit of that trepidation, you know, wanting to, or feeling a sense of responsibility for what it should be and what it could be. And yeah, so I often think about that and like what a privilege and what a relief, and also probably a little intimidating again.
When I asked them about, you know, holding on to these works, they said they'd been waiting for a time like this. I remember that now. Yeah. They said we're waiting, and they really wanted someone to look at Arthur's work and write about it and show it. They wanted it to be someone in the family, they said, because, and Millie said to me, she goes, I wanted it to be someone in the family because they would understand who Arthur was and could write about him. And I thought that was, again, like what you said, it was a relief, but it was also a bit intimidating. Like, okay, now they've been waiting for me or someone, but it happened to be me, you know, for those years. I don't think it was exactly me, but it was someone to come to them like that. Because they seem to be ready. They're just kind of sitting there, yeah, you know, they're going through, you know, while I'm being all professional showing, but they're just kind of sitting there being patient. And then finally they go, okay, you know, here are the paintings. You know? So.
Fantastic. And you mentioned already, and it's true, we were, I think, expecting to find expecting to find more works in institutions and didn't. And we had this MAP grant, which specifies a percentage of, works. There's a cap on how many works can come from the estate. Really important. Really important fail-safe. It's a good rule. But that in part, and really also just your curiosity and interest, sent you out to meet with lots and lots of collectors. And I think you had some great conversations with those collectors as well. And I just wanted to know if you wanted to share any of those stories or any of those experiences. Sure. Yeah?
Yeah, there were a number of really important collectors of his work that allowed us to borrow their works. One of them was Tom Beckett. Him and his father had worked with Arthur right from the very beginning, and they had collected his work as well as showed his work in the gallery that they had in Yorkville for a number of years, and he continued to help us a lot. He was able to contact a lot of collectors and was able to kind of negotiate getting some of these works and letting them know how important the show was, because some didn't want to let go of these for a couple of years. Collectors, they let these works go and they travel, like this one. It's going to be for a couple of years, and so they don't have them. And there was so Tom really helped us with that. Another one was a collector in Ottawa, and I went to meet him. It was on a Sunday. He owns a factory. And it was on a Sunday, a holiday. No one was around. He was there. And he took me into his factory. Beautiful, huge factory, absolutely sparkling clean. But on the walls and in this factory are all these huge European paintings. He's got them all on his wall. And so we're walking through the factory. He's telling me what he makes and what he does in the factory and how he loves all these paintings. And he's a collector. So I go into the middle of the factory, and he's got a gallery built in the middle of his factory. There's a gallery, a professional gallery. It's all white, And in this gallery, I think he had 7 Arthur Shilling paintings just sitting there waiting for me. And so I walks in there, and I says, "Which ones can I have? I like them all. They're all beautiful. In fact, we've got several of them here in the show." And he goes, "You can have them all, And so that was quite an experience for me. I liked how he was a businessman. I met him at the door of his factory. In 35 minutes, I was out. And I had 5 paintings, So that was, it was like amazing. It's like, did that really happen, One of those. Oh, and another example of a collector was Rudy Bees. And he's the one I started with, really. Rudy Bees is a collector from Mississauga, and he became Arthur's really good friend. A lot of these collectors are just collectors, but Rudy was his friend. Rudy used to build frames for Arthur. Arthur would come by with a bunch of paintings, and Rudy would be down in his basement. He wasn't a framer, but he somehow had a tool or something that he can do it. And so he'd frame all, and they're all the same. They were all the same, like for years. Anyways, but Rudy, I think this is an interesting story to share here. Rudy met Arthur when in the fall of 1975, Arthur was in a hospital at Soldiers Memorial in Orillia. Arthur grew up, he had rheumatic fever as a child, and it damaged his heart valves. So when he was 34 years old, he was about ready to die. His heart valves were what they call leaking. And back then it was a really risky operation. And so how Rudy comes into the conversation is Rudy and his wife Gloria, they wanted Arthur to paint a couple of pictures of their kids, some portraits. And Rudy had never met Arthur, but saw some of his paintings and says, "Wow, I like the way this guy paints. I want him to paint a couple of portraits of my kids." So they were going to go look for him, but found out that he was in Rama. So they drove up to Rama. They're from Mississauga. They drove up to Rama and showed up at the found out where the studio was, and showed up there. And Millie was there, my Uncle Paul was there, and a few others were there. And they said, "Oh, well, I like that painting there. I'd like to buy it." And they said, "Well, Arthur's not selling any right now. And he's in the hospital. He's really sick. And these are all his only paintings, and we don't want to sell them." So, Rudy says, "Wow, that's really sad," and as he's leaving, my Uncle Paul, Arthur's brother, says to Rudy, says, "He's in the hospital at a Soldiers Memorial. He's in this room. If you stopped by and saw him, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing, because it was on the way out of town." So they stopped in, talked to Arthur, and saw that he was in pretty bad shape, but he was talking, and he was really upset about not having enough paintings for his family. The prognosis was he was going to die very, very soon. And he was upset he didn't have enough paintings for his family to support them, his wife and son. So anyways, Rudy and Gloria left. They went back home, but they happened to have a relative at St. Michael's who was a surgeon. So they called up and said, "We know this guy up in," they called him and said, "There's this guy up in Rama. They think he's going to die. I was wondering if you can do anything." So they called around their surgeon relative, and he said, "Yeah, we can do something. Bring him up here, but you have to get the family's permission, and we'll see what we can do." So anyways, so Rudy called. Of course, he doesn't know the numbers. He's got to look around. He calls every shilling in the book, is what he told me. Finally got Millie, and they waited around a couple of days. They must have been talking about it. And finally they said, yes, we'll allow him to go down to St. Michael's. So Arthur gets into an ambulance. They take him down there, get him on the operating table immediately. And from what I heard is that Arthur actually died on the table, but they revived him. They did the surgery, and the doctor said that he wouldn't have done it if he was any older, but he gambled on his youth because he was only 34 years old. And Arthur lived. Arthur lived through that. Anyways, at the end of that, he gave Rudy that painting that he wanted. He says, "Oh, that painting, you can have it." So Rudy did get the painting. So, but yeah, so that's a different kind of collectors, and Arthur did. He seemed like he welcomed lots of different kind of people in his life, and people who could, who would help him. Like, it was funny that Rudy showed up at that moment. Like, that's, to me, and he lived 10 more years, and that's really what this show is about. It's those final 10 years, 76 to 86. So these are the works that he produced after he got out of the hospital, for those.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think fairly early on you knew it wasn't going to be a retrospective. Yeah. And that I imagine alleviates a little bit of that intimidation. It doesn't have to be the final word. But yeah, I think for a while you'd had in your mind that this was going to be about sort of looking at that last 10 years and this sort of intense period of production in which he changed quite dramatically. And really, has this pinnacle of the works that are in the Ojibwe Dream. And I think about as well, sort of, that process of focusing in on what is going to be in this room, because it's not a huge space. I mean, it's big, but and we've used the ramps, but certainly there are way more paintings out there that could be. There are a lot. He painted a lot in this last period. So yeah, I think about that focusing in phase, and I think often about the difficulty, or I don't know about you, but I know that I feel this if I'm in a research phase for a really long period of time, and you spend all this time gathering stories and gathering information and looking at works and listing things, and it just can become so big. And for you, I mean, this project was in your mind for so long. And I find exiting out of that research phase and deciding, okay, I've got that, now we start honing in, I find that a difficult one, personally. And here's where Celeste comes in again, so thanks. Because I think she put it to you this way and said, okay, so this is great, right? You've come back and you've got this list of like 50 or 60 amazing paintings that are all fantastic, and wouldn't it be great? But what are the 5? If there are 5 key works, what are they? What are the ones that you can't live without? And what do they say about the show? And yeah. And I don't think you had an answer right away. That's a hard question, right? It makes you focus. And we were off-site for sort of around that chunk of time. Those of you who are following us along, we spent last spring, off-site at 420 George Street North while some work happened here. And what we did one of those days off-site was printed out or made sort of reproductions of all of these works that you'd gathered, and some of them we didn't have great images of, and some of them we had great images of, and we had all of these color printouts and put them up around the walls and played with them in different ways, played with them chronologically, played with them in terms of subject, and tried to figure out what ones we couldn't live without. And I don't know, that was a really great day for me. It was a really great day for me, and yeah, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that day, or if...
I wouldn't mind talking about how we focused.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, focusing is important in the curatorial process. Yeah, we did have we had a lot of Arthur painted a lot of paintings, and there was a lot that came in. But it was when we put them on that wall, we're able to see, like, these ones fit, these ones kind of fit, and these ones don't, a lot of them were the same, and you were able to see how they work together. And it was almost like it went from an idea to we're actually seeing the physical piece, with the colors and then the imagery. And yeah, I think that led to a process of really focusing once we did that. And it was interesting that of all the stories that emerged, talking with the different collectors, talking with other artists who knew about his work, one thing that emerged, well, when you're working with a lot of information, it's easy to get carried away with a lot of different stories. And again, I think it was Celeste who came up and said, okay, we've got all this stuff going on, we're getting works are coming in, and stuff, but what is our focus? What is the absolute reason why we're doing this show? What did Arthur bring? And it was once that question was posed, it was like, okay, the reason we're doing it is because Arthur Shilling was a really incredible artist, and he was an incredible visionary, and that's what it came down to. It was his incredible skill. Technically, if you look at the drawing upstairs, it's just amazing. And then the way he was able to paint, it's like he was hit. At the end of those 10 years, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, his work he's just so confident. He's so confident. He's using a palette. He's in his studio in Rama, and he's drawing. He's putting the drawings in, and then he's just laying down the paint. It's almost perfect. And I've heard that from so many painters. They say, oh my God, his confidence and skill is just, it's just incredible how he's able to get the exact color and the exact place. And there's even one here where, well, during that time he was starting even to not even bother with the underpainting. He'd leave it. He'd leave half the painting, not paint it, but he put in the colors and it would come alive. There's one in the corner there where I think he paints the background more than the figure. Yet the figure is the focus. I mean, he's so confident at that. His skill has become just, he's able to see that. And I think that really influenced how we set up the show. When I first envisioned this, I wanted, like, he's got all these great quotes. I wanted quotes of him all over. I wanted his palette. Like, he had these palettes that were just thick with paint, because that's how he painted. He just poured everything on there and then painted and just left them. Or his drawing books. He was an incredible drawer, drew all the time. He had cartoons. He'd always do cartoons. Like right now, he'd probably be sitting here doing a cartoon of us sitting here talking, but have us drawn as crows, with little, conversations going on. Then he'd make fun of us, and it would bring lots of laughter to us. So I wanted all those things. There was a film of his life. I wanted that too, But then once it became clear that he was an artist, it was like, okay, the space needs to be a space it needs to be set up so that the viewer can just, feel and see his skill, just feel those colors, what he was trying to say, just be alone with that. And I think that you can see that in the didactic that we wrote upstairs. Like we worked on it over and over again. It was just honing it down, getting it clear. Like what was Arthur, what was he doing? What is this space really? And for me, this really is his dream. He began with, and those final 10 years began with that dream of his. And his dream was, when I say dream, it's more like a vision. It's like something that tells you how to proceed, how to move forward, and what your action needs to be. And I think in that, when he began this 10 years, this 10-year final journey of his, what he was really motivated was to share the beauty he saw in Anishinaabe people, and I think in all people, because his work is not about borders, but it's about, it's accessible. I mean, I've gotten that many times from visitors here. They say his work is so accessible, and that's what he was trying to do. He was speaking about that. So we began, the show with this quote. He talks about, his dream. He says, it begins like this. He says, "The dream transforms life. For a bright illuminated instant, the shackles of everyday eyes are shattered, and the gracefulness of life is laid bare. All things begin here. Mine would be the Ojibwe dream." So, it's like setting up that space, but it has to be clear, and then you can experience it. And so all those quotes, all those great quotes, and they're kind of, in the video, it's not here. No. So.
I just want to jump in about,
Okay.
you mentioned sort of that viewer experience, or wanting to create a space for people to come and just be hit with his incredible skill. And we're sitting in front of this the beauty of our people. And it may be surprising to a lot of the people sitting in the audience, but this was not part of the show for a long period of time. And I think that, I think that we started thinking, Celeste and I definitely started thinking about that moment, that potential moment for people when they either peer over the edge there or come into this space and just, are confronted by this. And certainly, I mean, it's huge, so there's that, but it's also incredibly powerful. And I wanted to open up a space to talk about that. And and so you say a couple things, but I also wanted to talk about the decision to invest in that. Yeah, and all of the people that helped us along the way in that.
Yeah, this piece was not always, I didn't always consider it for the show. You have to remember, when I first saw it, I'll have to describe that.
Yeah.
It was the middle of winter, and it was dreary out. I think it was snowing out, so it was really dark. And this isn't, I saw it in Arthur's studio, a very dark place. It didn't have this nice frame around it. It was in 5 pieces, and it looked pretty rough. It was, you have to remember again, it was 30 years old. It had been sitting there, probably a little longer, because he finished it a year or so before he passed on. So I saw it, and I knew it was something. It was really incredible. We spread it all out, and we had a great conversation about it. But for me, it just, I was looking at the other paintings, and those are just really spectacular to me. And so I had taken some pictures of it when it spread out, and I brought them back to the gallery, and we had a little conversation about it. And I don't know how it went, but it was like, okay, let's look at this a little closer. We should include this one. This is important, isn't it? So it kind of reminded me of when we had it spread out over in the studio. And Millie, I was chatting with Millie, and we were standing in front of it. And we had this long conversation about it. And she said to me, she goes, she says, Arthur thought of this as a teaching tool. He spent, 4 months painting it. He had children from the reserve coming in like every day, and he would paint. And he was pretty sick at the time. He was pretty weak, but he would paint it as best he could. And she said he wanted it as a teaching tool, and he wanted it to travel across. He envisioned it as traveling across the country. And it was funny because, she said he wanted it as a teaching tool, and she goes, and to spark conversation. And she goes like this, she goes, see, it's just like what we're doing right now. Like that, like what we were doing right now. In fact, what we're doing right this minute. Yeah. We're talking about it, And so that stuck with me. And then when I came back here, you and Celeste came to me and you said, we are going to include that, of course. And I thought, I was still thinking about it because it didn't look like this. Yeah, no. So that gets to kind of like the investment.
The investment, yeah. So we decided that it was worth it. It was worth it, absolutely. And we also, I think, in that we were developing this education guide and this plan for how we were going to open up this for students and for adults as well. So I think it became really, really important for a couple of reasons, and also wanted to really hear you and hear you in the it's not ready right now. We decided we needed to invest in this, and at this point, really, we need to acknowledge the Chief and Council of Rama First Nations, who sponsored the cleaning and the framing of this, and not only this, but all of the pieces that came from the estate, except for one, which didn't need it. Yeah. That was a tremendous investment in this work, and. It looks amazing. And I think as well, it's important to acknowledge museum pros. And you mentioned that you'd heard through this process from painters about the tremendous confidence and that hand of Arthur and just how remarkable it is. And we've loved working with museum pros. They're artists as well. They're a small business in Toronto that's really not a small business anymore, but they do framing and cleaning and shipping and storage and all sorts of things. And Gary Ball framed it for us and had to really work on a plan for this because though you can't see it, it's 4 of the panels are canvas, 1 of the panels is linen, 1 of the panels is shorter than the other. We had to figure out lots and lots of... They're not all square. You don't notice it, so I'm really pleased to see it here. And I think as well and the image that we shared on Facebook, and anyway, the image that we've used to promote this event is an image that is from a day when we went to Museum Pros, and we started gathering things there because we were off-site, and the vault was, anyway, we couldn't gather things here, but we knew we needed to start bringing these paintings together, and went to Museum Pros, and it was the first time I'd been in a space with these works, except for I'd seen 1 or 2 of Shilling's works at the AGO before, but that was really remarkable, and we started even, taking the works out of the frames that were, the 70s, 80s frames. You know how those can date things, right? And they were great at the time, but just popping those works out of the paintings, all of a sudden they looked like they could have been painted, yesterday. So that was really remarkable, and I think about that day a lot, and it was a really important day for me. Who else do I need to... No, I think that's good for right now. But I just think about that moment of standing in front of those panels and thinking further to that moment that is going to be created for people when they come and stand in front of the panels here, and how valuable that was going to be. And I think, many things emerged for you when we were thinking about this work, and Some of those have come out here, but I also think about you talked a lot about the influence of German Expressionism. Yeah, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about that here, and you certainly, anyway, it's up to you, but I've got other questions.
Well, sure, I'll just,
Yeah?
Yeah, I think that Arthur was really deliberate in choosing Expressionism as a way to speak about his vision, because that's really what he was trying to do here. He's trying to tell us, certain things. He's trying to tell us, the Anishinaabe people are beautiful or strong, and those are important. Back when he was growing up, those messages weren't there. But he wanted to distinguish himself also from the Woodland School. And there was a little quote from my uncle that really kind of jarred me, made me see this a little bit closer. He says that Arthur, he wouldn't clean up his work. He would leave the smudges in there, and kind of like he would jam the paint in. He would just leave it, like he would paint and just like he didn't want to clean it up. He said that's how our lives are. He goes, they're rough sometimes. They're leaving the other stuff. He goes, but when you look at it, it's really quite beautiful, Yeah. Like he said that to me once, So, but I think he used expressions because he wanted something. There was a way to kind of express his inner feelings. He wasn't going to describe the world. He was going to talk about his inner, but at the same time using faces, okay, and the colors. It gave him that freedom to work with the colors and put them next to each other, and not have the lines like the accepted way of painting. Like he would, and also I think too. He distinguished himself from the Expressionists. He always painted the community and himself as strong and not distorted. Like the Expressionism, often they did distortions of the human figure. He never did that. He didn't make fun of us. He didn't want to. He wanted to paint us strong. Like that was really, he thought that out, There was never a painting where, where the face is distorted or, we look funny. He never did that. He thought about that, and it's really it's a deliberate style for him. And once he came across that, it's like he just flew, and his confidence was just really extraordinary. Like you see at his early career, he painted real realists. Like he painted portraits, like these or this one over here. The real fine portraits. But he changed at this time. Yeah. So, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to choose. I wanted to just look closely at this period. I felt that he'd really became who he was. He found his language. He knew how to paint so well. Like the early ones, sometimes the hands may be off a little bit. He's learning. He taught himself how to paint. But these ones, everything just seems so perfectly well done. The proportions and everything.
I also we don't have the catalog ready yet, but it's coming out this summer, and I wanted to bring in, I wanted to mention Wanda Nanabush and Robert Houle, who are the other people who are contributing essays to this publication. So it's really going to be a phenomenal publication. We've got these little flyers, it's got excerpts on the back, and I think you're going to want to reserve a copy, which you can do. And I think, just kind of continuing the theme of conversations, I think not only the decision to bring who to bring in, but then once we decided, okay, we're bringing in Wanda and we're bringing in Robert, these two really important figures in Canadian art. And I think about, the perspectives that they brought to it and the discussions that they spurred to a certain extent. Which brings us back to the beauty of our people a little bit. Maybe, if you wanted to talk about it. I don't know if you do. But yeah, I think about how great that process has been. And we've landed, I think, with some phenomenal pieces of writing that we're incredibly proud of. Yeah.
Well, when I started to think about the catalog, I had maybe half a dozen writers that I thought would be interesting. So, I made a list and started looking at their writings and some of the work that they're doing today. The first one on the list was Robert Hoole. I've always just been a real admirer of his work. So he brings his professionalism, well, both as an artist, curator, but also he's a friend of Arthur's. They weren't close friends, I don't think, but they did know each other. They respected each other's work. Robert was around when those discussions of contemporary Native art was emerging in Canada. He was part of that. So, and I've always loved the way he has this continuing conversation, both in his work as well as his writings, about that tension between the traditional and the contemporary context. I find that really interesting. So I thought he would see that in Arthur's work, because Arthur's painting in a real modernist sort of style, but he's also bringing in those issues of those issues we deal with as an Aboriginal. So that was really great, and I was really relieved when he said, yes, I would love to write about, my friend Arthur's work, he says. So it's been really great working with him, and I find his work is almost poetic. Yes. It flows, it's beautiful work. But he makes connections that I wouldn't have, so I think that's really great. The second writer, it was really important that the second writer capture Arthur's work as relevant today. Here he's passed on 30 years, but for me, I think the issues he was dealing with, the way he's painting, the things he's trying to speak to us about are really important today. There's a lot of really pressing issues in contemporary society that I think he speaks to. So the second writer, I wanted to be able to speak about that. So I didn't want it to be a retrospective of his life, he did this and that, but I wanted it to be about why is he important today. So Wanda Nanabush's work quickly came to mind. She became really the only writer I thought who could do this. I've been following her work. She's done some really relevant and important exhibitions using Native art to talk about contemporary issues. And so I've been following her work, and I like how she does like the personal and the political in her work. The person was really political for her. So she comes from that perspective. And Arthur, I thought that's pretty close there. So anyways, so I asked her, I met her, and asked her if she wanted to write for this. And she says, oh my God, she goes, I'd love to. She says, if it wasn't for Arthur Shilling, she said, I would not be doing the work I'm doing now. She said, I would not be an artist, I would not be a curator, I would not even think about art. She said, but so she wrote this beautiful essay on him and how he's relevant today, but also his impact on her. And what was interesting about all that was how they're insiders and outsiders as well, similar to my situation, but, they're both in the Anishinaabe community, but also, outside in a way, they're out in the world dealing with, larger issues. And so they bring that to the table. And so that was how it ended up. And I think we ended up with some really, really strong writing. And I think it really takes Arthur's work and it does its service. Like there's been really no writing about Arthur Shilling's work. There's really been nothing. And so I think this catalog will, place it within a larger discussion and speak about the importance of his work. So,
we're just sort of nearing the end, I think, of what we're going to talk about, and then you guys can ask us questions if you'd like. But I just think about sort of that last, the installation week, and then the week after, and then the time after that, and just starting to have those pieces here in this gallery, starting to pull them out of the boxes, starting to play with them in the room. And the first one that went up was this, because we knew it could only go there. So that's an answered question. Let's start there. And I think, gosh, I don't know how many times you've rewritten your essay. I mean, it's fantastic. But you're thinking on it changed tremendously, I think, through this process. And one of those tremendous moments of change was being in this space and having it, settle and be what it is. And then even, watching people come and see it, and watching the family come and see it, and watching collectors come and see it. And you went on a school tour, just sort of watching kids come and see it. And hearing people's responses and watching them move through the space and coming by yourself when it's empty. I think that was, I see that as one of the major shifts, one of those major moments for you. And I often think about that as like an additional conversation. And here you are chatting with all of these paintings again. And yeah, so I'm curious if you wanted to talk about that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think seeing all these works in this space definitely did change how I wanted to write about his work. I had completed a draft of the essay before I saw any of the works here in this space. And what I wanted to do was, I thought it'd be interesting to do kind of like these little impressions between my own personal experience with Arthur, as well as, what I've gathered, the stories I've gathered since, Now, that seemed to work okay. But then when I saw all the works in the space, it was like this different, something else happened. It was the clarity of it. It was like the strength of his vision. I didn't want to talk about, I wanted to include some of those stories, but it was really about his skill and his clarity. So I felt like my writing had to be really clear. My writing had to be strong. It couldn't be, okay, well, we did this, and, we wandered over there a little bit. No, it had to be really strong. So so it was like as soon as I saw these works, it's like I could see the writing, And so I sat down and I mapped everything out differently. And I included some of the things, but it was like, it needed to be as strong as the works. That's how I felt. Yeah. I don't know whether it is, but I think it's closer. It was just really clear sentences, and it's almost like the way he paints, everything is perfect. Everything is essential. So I felt like there was too much unessential things in mine, so I got rid of them. And so so that was, again, it's almost like a conversation with him. He's saying, okay, this is how I want you, So it's almost like I had to listen and think about it, And it comes from, the tours. It comes from talking to people who come into the space, people who are talking about his artwork. They're all saying, oh, it's really strong. It's really clear. It's, they're the one, it's almost like he's talking to me through them or something, It's an interesting process, but I tried to listen to it the best I could.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to take questions at this moment. If not, we're hanging around, so you can chat with us later as well. But we're also really close to a different phase, right? A packing it up phase. So in the back of William and my mind is that on Tuesday, we're going to be packing these guys away. And then on Wednesday, they get picked up. Thursday they get picked up. And, but we are happy that it's going to Thunder Bay. So that will be opening in June, and you're going to be involved in conversations about how that looks. And we're still, final stages of getting the catalog off to print. So we're still really in it. And the McLaren show will be another show as well. So. Yeah, it's gonna be sad. Yes, John.
Just as an artist and a person, I want to thank you guys for doing this show. I think this is important work that you've done, and of course the media. I think we're in the presence of a great and powerful artist, and this is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I've always felt that Arthur Shilling's work is up there with Morrisville and OJ. That he's one of the major artists coming from our community and often has been local. Right? So I'm so thrilled that Can we just touch on that? I thought it was one of the most beautiful things about the art.
I do really like that story, Murray. So thanks for bringing it up. I think the story really speaks about Arthur, inviting people into his life and being inclusive. Like he was, like he always had people around him. Like when I would go to his place, there'd be people around, and he would be drawing over there and painting, but he'd come out and there'd be workmen. Okay, and the place that he built in Rama, it's almost like a compound. It's got these huge gates, but they're always open. Stonework. He had a house, and he kept building it, and then he kept building, adding on to his house as well as his studio. And his studio became 3 stories. It's a huge timber frame. He used to go around and get wood from barns that were falling down, and he'd bring them over, and he'd have everybody working there for him. But one thing is really I love the story about the space is that he had a lot of guys working for him, and these were a lot of the his friends who were in residential school, and they would come to his space, and it was a safe place. And the res can be pretty rough, but and back then it was pretty poor, but it would come to his place, and he would give them things to do. He'd give them work, and they would build with stone. They'd be carving. They'd be, putting up windows. Like all those windows are different. They're all circles or triangles. Give them work. But it was like a safe place. And I remember Travis said to me once. He said the guys would come, and they would all know that they were in residential school together, but they would never talk about it. But they were together, and that gave them comfort. And I think it was that story, as well as like with the kids could come there and they'd all be fine, So his place was his studio, but it was also this really important space on the reserve. And it's still there today, yeah, so. Thanks, Maria.
We heard earlier about the West Coast there, where the indigenous artists had some concern about how the masks were being displayed.
Yeah.
So as a curator, having to curate this show, what are the kinds of issues that you have to deal with?
Interesting. Did you hear?
With what?
So remember earlier Celeste was talking about the curation of the masks when she was over at the Camdo meeting and how they were presented, I presume like in glass cases. Yeah, glass cases. So more like artifacts. Yeah, positioned anthropologically, not as works. So then, sorry, I don't know your name. This gentleman is just asking about what issues are you considering when you're curating work like this?
I don't think we had an issue.
No, we didn't have any issues, but why didn't we have any issues? Maybe. I mean, I think it was really important from very early stages to consider this and to position Arthur, though we're working with a map grant, to position Arthur as a contemporary artist and to think about him as an artist. And really when we honed in on, we're looking at that skill, we're not presenting this as anything different from anything that we would show in this space because we show contemporary art in this space. So we're just respecting his work and positioning him as he should be, as a contemporary artist.
And also like the spiritual entities he has in the work, as well as some masks. I think he put them in there. They weren't specific. They were general figures he was working with, and I think it was. They're not specific. They're not a story. They're not a specific spiritual secret story or anything. He's just making reference to a lot of these beings, and I think what that was about, and the best I can discern through my research and conversations, is that he was letting us know that for him the spiritual exists in the everyday. And so that kind of follows that they should be out here. He says they're around him. They're not something that's hidden away. And also because of how he was in terms of like accessibility and how he was in sharing, he wanted to share his story. Things have been too long not spoken, so he wanted to have his voice out there. So I think by showing these and having them in this particular space, I think this is exactly what he wanted. For me, it almost feels like this has fulfilled that vision that he had. He wanted his work to be in a space like this, and he wanted it to travel across the country. He wanted these discussions to happen. So I think this is a really perfect place. So.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm actually from Aurelia, and my family is kind of artistic, so we've always known about Arthur Shilling, and actually my sister, who's an artist, knows Catholic.
Right.
And I found out about the show through Catholic's Facebook. And we live in Ottawa, so we came here specifically.
Thank you for coming.
And I was so excited, and I'm so excited to be here and see all these, because even though I've been in Aurelia and there've been a few shows of his art there was never this much, and there would only be a few that the family would let out at a time. And I always wondered why it wasn't displayed in like the National Gallery of Canada or something. AGO, because when I learned more about art, I realized that I loved it, but there was reasons why other people loved it too, because it was world class.
Yeah.
And so I've always found it strange, and especially when I went to the gallery one day and they had these panels lying on the floor. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
And I was so scared because there were little kids running around.
Yeah.
And so my question is, I'm wondering, I just want to thank you so much for having this show and other shows, but I'm wondering what's going to happen in the future. I know that a lot of these are owned by private people who want them back, but I'm just wondering about maybe the ones that the family owns, or is there some idea of the future?
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, we've worried about that.
Yeah, it's a yeah. I mean, when you do a show like this, and knowing that this is an early, I mean, this is really the first show of this size, this quality. Having a catalog accompany it, and we are translating that catalog it's going to be available in Anishinaabe, English, and French. So we're really pumping a lot into this, and part of that is to not only open up, but also spur or be a catalyst, to use the Canada Council funding language. To be a catalyst for the kinds of things that really should have happened a long time ago, frankly. And often, I mean, I think we touched on a couple of reasons why we can suspect that he didn't get his due at that time. And it's part of this, Anglo-Saxon employees in these spaces who can't necessarily see something unless it's already been laid out. And okay, so we've got the Morrisseau, and we've got Daphne Ojig, and we've got the Woodland School. Okay, we should be looking for Woodland School. And if anything else is incongruous with that, I don't know what to say about it, so I'm just gonna not, because that's dangerous for me. Or it doesn't matter. Nobody else has told me that it matters yet. So we're hoping. There aren't currently conversations that we're engaged in, but we're hoping. And the best you can do is put something up on the right kinds of footing. And I think that now we've got language that's in that professional curatorial tone that's going to speak differently to different people, going to speak differently to different collectors, institutions. And I think it, I don't know, I don't want to say arms it, but I'm going to because I'm lost for another word, but it arms the argument in a better and different way. Positions it, yeah, that's a better word. That's a better word. Let's not be too aggressive.
Yeah, I think we're kind of worried about it.
Yeah.
But this gets it out there. This is the beginning step. It does give it a language because it places it, and the catalog is going to be professional. It gives it a lot of exposure, and it's traveling. So I'd like to see an institution pick it up where it's stored properly. They're all cleaned, framed. But we got to start. We did how many? 7 of them?
8?
Yeah, including. And look how beautiful it looks, and the other paintings, and it really brought it into today's world because those were old frames. I mean, we talked a lot about frames, but it placed it back in the 70s. Well, where now it's part of today's world. I mean, it makes it, it really changes them.
Changes the way you look at it.
They become they're stronger, and
So
we'll hope. But
My wish for that would be that, say, the chief and council of Rama, would do a gallery there to honor his work, plus have new space for all the new artists that are coming out of Rama. Because there's, I know in your family, artists go back generations.
Right.
And so that would be my wish, that with all the tourists, like it would have grand.
And it's a tremendously creative space there.
Yeah, there's always been artists, a lot of artists from there, musicians and dancers. There's been theater there, so there's a. Well, let's see. I know he did get a scholarship to go to OCAD at the time. He didn't go to very many classes, though. He just didn't. He just didn't. But saying that, though, he also cultivated friendships with a lot of really good artists. So he was always looking for that. He also went to Southampton for 1 year when he was, I think, 16. I wish I knew the name of these artists. But even from there, really important, Telford, his name was. Like, he became friends with him, and they were friends all, his entire life. And there was another painter here who ended up in Peterborough. And his studio burned down. But anyways, he was friends with him. George Rath, But again, even though he was self-taught, he had a lot of really close friends with really good painters. So I don't think so, not back then. No, I remember the story where he had some drawings. He showed up in Toronto. They really liked him, so they gave him a little bit of money to go, but he didn't bother. He had this extraordinary drive. Like, you have to remember, here he was in Rama, a little house. Like, he lived at my grandma's and he had a little studio, a little room in the back. But yet he would get up and he would paint like all the time, and he would draw all the time. So self-taught, yeah, and books, yeah. So he self-taught but not isolated,
No.
What's that?
No, it's not in this book here.
No.
Kind of history.
No, it's not.
No.
So
I've just got one more, and I'll take one more if there's
I'm just wondering, I'm not sure if I want this done in, but when I look at the art, I can see spiritualism before I can see a lot of depth. And I look at the art, it's like, what is he trying to tell us? Is it trying to tell us statement, or is it just content?
Did you hear?
something about spiritual?
Sorry, it's difficult
Yeah,
to
it's
hear.
here.
What I heard was, can you go again?
Like, what is the depth in the picture?
Right. He's just saying, when you first look, maybe you just, sorry, I'm going to paraphrase. When you just
Yeah.
see, maybe just see, you know, the skill and the faces, but you can look and just continue to see more depth in there. And there's, he's saying that he can see a lot of some spiritualism in there. And he's wondering what, if you could speak a little bit about what Arthur's trying to convey with his works. Big question.
It is.
Yeah?
I think first and foremost, what he was really trying to speak about was he was giving us, as a community, the imagery so that we could see ourselves strong, and we could see ourselves proud, and we could see ourselves as beautiful. I think that was the first thing. We did not have that imagery around, and I mean, it's different today, but back then it was, you know, Ram was quite poor, and it was a pretty rough place, you know, and so I think, so there was that, but also he wanted to show that, you know, he could paint. It was really important to him that he could really paint. He knew how to draw, and he could take on the style, and he can paint with this skill. He was almost like almost some of these, you know, almost like he's showing off, you know?
The drawing competition, sort of, between him.
Oh, yeah, there was a story that I heard that whenever he would run into Morris, so they weren't friends or anything, but they would see each other, you know, at openings and stuff like that, and they would hang out a little bit. And Morris would always come up to Arthur and say, "I'm the better drawer," and Arthur would go, "No, I'm the better drawer." So it was kind of like that. And Morriso was an incredibly extraordinary artist. The way he was, you know, I've seen a lot of his drawings. And so sometimes I think when I look at Arthur's work that he was showing Arthur, she was showing Norval Morriso that he could draw better, you know. But even if you look at his drawings, again, you know, it's in a Western style, but he's indigenized it.
Yeah.
You know, he's put those little figures in there. So, but he would always said, like I remember seeing a lot of those drawings in a studio, and he would say, "Well, I'm just using. I do that just to warm up my hands so I can paint," you know. But it was probably being very, you know, very curt about it. But so I think those are the things, and I think the spiritual part of it, you know, he was. You know, in those 10 years, he was often moving to that other side towards death. Like, it was really close. Like, he always had his heart kicking. Like, you can hear it. You can hear the sound. And that was his time, you know, and then, you know, he was always in pain, you know, and he knew he only had a short time. So I think he would go into that world a little bit sometimes, because he would be rushed to the hospital periodically. And so I think those figures came from that. He was moving into that other world. But I don't really know. It also, for me, it says that the spiritual is in the everyday. It's around, you know, each of the figures. You know, not always, but you know, I think he was letting us know that, or just wanting us to speak about that. It's not some event that happens to you. It's not some revelation, but it's just it's in the everyday, which makes it extraordinary. You know, so I think that's how I'm reading it. Because I can think about him as he was as a person. He wasn't like this guy who would walk around and be spiritual. It was the everyday for him. You know, I find that really interesting.
I'm going to give the last question to Claire. And then we'll be upstairs and happy to chat further.
It's not so much a question. I just wanted to say that I've been nagging Celeste and you for, I don't know how long now, about more Aboriginal art. And then it's, you know, getting very frustrated. and then all of a sudden this show comes on. And I can tell you now that looking at the collective dignity in this and the individual dignity in there, the whole
So just where it's
Okay. It's a reserve. It's called the Chippewas of Rama First Nation. We often call it Rama. It's near Aurelia, probably about 2 hours from here. Yeah, so it's a small reserve.
And thank you all for sticking with us and persevering. I know those chairs aren't the most comfortable. And we do invite you to hang out. We're open until 5 today, and that is the last time that you can see these works. So we'll work to get these chairs out of the way so that you can enjoy the show, but also there's refreshments upstairs, and William and I will be hanging out. And then we're going to go out after.